She hid behind the Lycan king to avoid her ex, he whispered. You're safe now, little one. The forest around her seemed alive, every tree a shadow, every whisper of the wind a voice warning her to run faster. Her heart thumped so violently that she was sure it would betray her location before she even reached the road. Somewhere behind her, the sound of approaching footsteps, steady, confident, and relentless, stirred a terror that refused to be quieted. Elira had tried everything. She had left her home at the break of dusk, slipping through narrow alleys and unlit streets, hoping the shadows would hide her from him. But he always found her. Her ex-lover, with his perfectly tailored clothes, sharp smile, and cold eyes, seemed to slip through the world like a shadow itself. He was charming when he wanted to be, but Elira knew better. She had known the danger long before it became impossible to ignore. Her lungs burned, and the branches tore at her sleeves as she darted deeper into the forest. Every step forward seemed heavier than the last, yet every glance behind reminded her that she could not stop. And then through the dense trees she saw it, a faint glow, silvery and soft, hovering in the darkness like a beacon of hope. The air grew colder as she approached it, and a strange scent brushed her senses, earthy and wild, tinged with something she could not name. Her feet slowed. Something about this place, this clearing, felt different, safer even, but she did not dare hope. Not yet. And then he appeared, not her ex, not the shadow she had been fleeing, something far more imposing yet somehow comforting. A figure emerged from the darkness, tall, broad, and silent as the forest itself. His eyes, golden and reflective in the dim moonlight, seemed to pierce through the trees. Fur covered his arms and shoulders, his presence both terrifying and majestic. Elira froze, her instinct screaming at her to run, but another, deeper instinct told her to stay. You shouldn't be here, the figure said, his voice low, calm, and yet carrying a weight that made the ground beneath her feel still. It's dangerous for you. I'm being followed, she whispered, her voice trembling. Please, I don't know where else to go. The creature stepped closer, and Elira felt the air shift around him. He was tall, taller than any human, but there was a grace in his movements, a power that was impossible to ignore. Yet there was also a gentleness, something she did not expect. You're safe now, he said, each word deliberate. Little one, you can hide here. I will protect you. Elira's pulse raced. The forest had never felt so alive, so dangerous and so welcoming at the same time. There was something about him that made her feel small, yet protected. The fear that had been gnawing at her bones began to ebb, replaced by a strange sense of trust she did not understand. But trust did not come easily. She had learned long ago that appearances could be deceiving, that the world was never kind to those who showed vulnerability. Her ex had been the cruelest teacher of all. She shook her head, trying to push away the feeling of safety creeping into her heart. I can't stay long, she said, her voice firmer now, trying to regain some control. He's still out there. I have to keep moving. The creature's golden eyes softened just slightly, as if reading the turmoil inside her. You cannot outrun danger forever, he said, but you can hide for now. Rest. Plan. The forest will keep you. Something about the way he said it made her hesitate. She did not fully understand what he was, but she felt it instinctively. He was powerful, more than anyone she had ever known, and he was offering her protection without demand or condition. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to breathe. The clearing around them was strange, almost otherworldly. Moonlight poured through the gaps in the trees, scattering silver across moss-covered stones and ancient roots that twisted like serpents. There was a quiet hum in the air, as if the forest itself had paused to watch them. Elira realized she had never seen a forest like this, not even in stories. It was dark and alive, dangerous yet beautiful, much like the creature before her. Why are you helping me?" she asked finally, her curiosity stronger than her fear. The creature tilted his head slightly, as if amused by her question. "Because," he said slowly, No one should be hunted in the dark, not without a choice. Elira swallowed hard, the words cutting through her like a balm. Choice. She had been running from her ex because he had taken her freedom for granted, because he believed she could be molded to his desire. The idea that someone, something, could offer protection without expecting anything in return was astonishing. "You don't even know me," she murmured. "I know enough," he replied. "Enough to see that you are not weak. You only seem so because the world has forced you into hiding." Elira felt a shiver run down her spine, not from fear this time, but from the raw truth in his voice. She had been hiding, not just from her ex, but from the pain, the memories, the part of herself that had been broken by betrayal. And yet here was someone who saw her as more than just a frightened girl. The forest deepened around them, the shadows twisting like living things. Elira's ex was out there somewhere, tracking her every step. She could almost hear his footsteps in the distance, echoing in the spaces between the trees. She clenched her fists, trying to suppress the panic that threatened to rise again. "Do you want to fight him?" the creature asked. Elira shook her head. "No, I just want to be safe. That's all," he nodded, and a strange calm settled over the clearing. "Then you will be, for now, rest. When dawn comes, you will decide your next move, but not tonight." The words were a promise, and Elira, exhausted and trembling, allowed herself to lean against him. The warmth from his presence was unexpected, a shield against the cold and fear. His fur brushed against her shoulder, and though it was thick and rough, there was a comforting weight to it. She did not know what he was, some kind of creature, some legend that had stepped from the stories of old, but she knew this. He was her sanctuary. And for the first time in nights, Elira let her eyes close. The moon climbed higher, casting silver light on the forest. Shadows moved, but she felt no fear. Not here, not now. The creature who had called himself the Lycan King was there, and with him the world seemed a little less cruel. But the forest had its own rules, and the shadows never truly slept. In the distance, the sound of a footstep snapped her awake. Her eyes flew open, heart hammering once again. But the Lycan King's golden gaze was already on the horizon, scanning, listening. His posture shifted, alert, ready to strike. He growled, a low, rumbling sound that seemed to shake the very earth beneath them. Elira could feel the tension radiating from him, a warning that danger was near. She clutched at his arm instinctively, seeking reassurance. "You are safe," he whispered, his voice a steady anchor amidst the chaos. "No one will touch you while I am here." And though she wanted to believe him, the gnawing fear of being hunted never left her entirely. Her ex was cunning, resourceful, and cruel. He would not stop, not until he had her back under his control. But for tonight, Elira was safe. And the forest, dark and endless, held its breath with her. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, or how she would face the dangers waiting beyond the trees. But in this moment, standing behind the Lycan King, she felt something she had not felt in a long time: hope. Hope and a flicker of trust. The wind shifted, carrying with it a faint, ominous scent. Something stirred deeper in the forest, something older and darker than her ex, older and darker than even the Lycan King himself. Elira shivered but held her ground, trusting the creature at her side. He lowered his head, his eyes meeting hers, intense and unwavering. "Sleep, little one," he said. "The night is long, but I will not let it touch you." Elira nodded, letting herself fall into the fragile cocoon of safety he offered. And as the first threads of sleep began to pull her under, she could not shake the thought that she had stumbled not just into safety, but into a world she had never imagined. A world of shadows, secrets, and a creature who might very well change the course of her life. Outside the circle of moonlight, the forest waited. The night had only begun, and so did their story. The forest breathed around Elira like a living creature, shadows stretching long and trembling beneath the silver light of the rising moon. She woke to the sound of leaves rustling, a gentle whisper that seemed almost protective rather than threatening. Beside her, The Lycan king, Kale, stood tall, alert, his golden eyes scanning the dark woods for any sign of movement. Elira rose slowly, brushing the leaves from her clothes. Her body ached from running, from the fear that had kept her muscles taut for hours, yet the feeling of safety beside him was undeniable. The night was long, but in his presence, the terror that had haunted her steps seemed to fade, at least for now. "You slept well?" Kale asked, his voice deep and calm, though his eyes never left the darkness beyond the trees. Elira swallowed. "I think I did." Her words were unsure, delicate. Sleep had not come easily, not since the world had taught her that safety was fleeting. But tonight she had rested. For a few hours at least she had been free. "Good," he said, his gaze finally falling on her. There was something in his eyes, a mix of curiosity and caution, like he was trying to measure the fragile thread of trust she had offered. "You need your strength. The forest may protect you, but it is not safe forever. He will come for you." Elira flinched. The words were blunt, but they carried a painful truth. Her ex would not relent. She knew this more keenly than she wanted to admit. Every step she had taken, every shadow she had passed, was proof that he would follow her through fire or darkness. "I know," she whispered, turning her gaze to the twisted trees that surrounded them. "I can't hide forever, can I?" Kale shook his head, the movement slow, deliberate. "No," he said, "but for tonight you can be safe. That is enough. Tomorrow we will decide the next move together." His words offered a strange comfort, yet they also carried a weight, a promise that she was beginning to realize was far heavier than any she had ever known. Trusting him meant acknowledging her fear, allowing herself to be vulnerable, and letting go of the careful control she had clung to for so long. "Tell me something," Elira said, finding courage in the quiet. "Why do you care? Why are you helping me?" Kale's expression remained unreadable. For a moment he did not answer, and the silence between them stretched like a taut wire. Then he spoke, his voice low, carrying a weight that made the air itself seem thicker. "Because," he said finally, "I know what it is to be hunted. To live in a world that fears you, misunderstands you, and seeks to control you. I see it in you, and I cannot ignore it." Elira's heart tightened at his words. There was no judgment, no demand, only recognition. She had been running not just from a man, but from the memories he had left behind. The betrayal, the lies, the feeling of being trapped in a life that was not hers. And here, in the midst of the forest, she realized that someone, something, understood. The forest around them seemed to respond to Kale's presence, the shadows shifting and bending, almost as if they were alive and guarding him. Elira took a cautious step closer, her curiosity stronger than her fear. "What are you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kale did not answer immediately. Instead, he moved through the trees with a grace that was almost predatory, yet not threatening toward her. When he finally turned, his golden eyes held a quiet intensity that made her chest tighten. "I am what the world fears," he said. "But you do not need to fear me, not while I am here." Elira's pulse quickened. There was something magnetic about him, something that both frightened and captivated her. And yet she could not ignore the pain that lingered in his gaze, the loneliness that seemed to cling to him like a shadow. "Are you alone?" she asked softly. Kale's jaw tightened, his gaze drifting to the forest beyond. "I have been alone for a long time," he admitted. "Longer than I can remember. And yet, seeing you here, I feel something I thought I had lost." The admission sent a shiver through Elira. She had known pain, but loneliness of that depth was almost unimaginable. For a brief moment, the forest seemed to grow quieter, as if listening to the fragile connection forming between them. Then, "I'm glad I found you," she said, surprising herself with the honesty. "Even if it's just for tonight." Kale's eyes softened, a rare gesture of vulnerability that he seemed almost reluctant to show. "Tonight," he echoed, and his voice carried a promise and a question at once. They moved together through the forest, Elira following the Lycan King's silent guidance. Every step she took was measured, cautious, Yet with him beside her, the fear that had driven her for days began to loosen its grip. As they walked, Cale began to explain the forest, the hidden paths, the creatures that lurked beyond the moonlight, and the rules that governed his domain. Elira listened intently, absorbing every detail. She realized that surviving here would require more than hiding. It would require understanding, trust, and a willingness to step beyond the fear that had defined her life. "You must learn to see without being seen," Cale said, his eyes scanning the shadows. "The forest will protect you only if you respect it. If you panic, if you run blindly, you will find only danger." Elira nodded, determined. "I'll try." Cale's gaze lingered on her, and for a moment the forest seemed to hold its breath. There was something in the way he watched her, a mixture of caution, admiration, and something deeper she could not name. It made her skin tingle, made her heart beat faster, yet also offered a strange reassurance. Hours passed as they moved through the trees, the silver light of the moon guiding them. Elira felt a connection growing, delicate and tentative, like a thread stretching between two souls wary of being broken. She began to understand that Cale's protection was not just physical, it was something deeper, something that reached into the heart, offering comfort and strength where fear had reigned. Yet, even in the quiet of the forest, danger was never far away. Elira could sense it, feel it pressing against the edges of their sanctuary. Her ex-lover had not given up, and she knew that the moment they allowed themselves a pause, he would strike. "Will he come for me?" she asked, her voice low, almost afraid to hear the answer. Cale's expression hardened, a shadow passing over his features. "Yes," he said, "and not alone. He is clever, resourceful, and cruel, but he underestimates you and me." Elira's stomach tightened. She had lived with fear for so long that even the thought of confrontation made her feel fragile. And yet, with Cale beside her, that fear was tempered by a newfound determination. She would not be hunted helplessly anymore. They reached a small clearing where the forest opened to a silver stream, its waters reflecting the moonlight in rippling patterns. Cale gestured for her to rest while he stood watch. She sat on a moss-covered rock, letting the cool air soothe her tense muscles. "You must understand," Cale said after a moment, "the world outside this forest is not kind. People like your ex, they seek to control, to possess. You have every right to run, to hide, to protect yourself." Elira met his gaze, her own eyes reflecting the moonlight. "I do. And I want to, but I don't want to be alone anymore." Cale's eyes softened again, and for a moment the fear that had defined both their lives seemed to dissolve. He stepped closer, his presence both commanding and reassuring. "You will not be alone, not while I am here. I swear it." The promise was a fragile thread in the dark, yet it was enough. Elira felt a small, daring hope flicker inside her, a hope that perhaps, with Cale, she could find a way to survive, to trust, and maybe even to heal. But the forest never allowed illusions of safety to last. As they settled near the stream, a sudden rustling broke the quiet. Cale's ears twitched, his golden eyes narrowing. Elira's heart leapt into her throat. From the shadows, a figure emerged. Not her ex, not yet, but someone or something, watching, waiting. The tension in the air became almost unbearable, as though the forest itself held its breath. Cale growled low, the sound vibrating through the ground beneath them. "Stay close," he whispered, his voice both warning and reassurance. "You are not yet safe." Elira clutched at him instinctively, the bond between them growing stronger with every passing moment of fear and anticipation. The forest was alive with threat, yet she realized with a startling clarity that she no longer faced it alone. And though the night stretched on and the shadows deepened, for the first time, she felt that she had someone to stand with, someone powerful, watchful, and perhaps, in time, someone who could help her face not just her pursuer, but the darkness that had followed her for so long. The night was far from over. Danger lingered unseen and patient. But Elira and Cale, wolf and hunted, protector and protected, had begun a delicate dance of trust, courage, and understanding that would shape the nights to come. And in the quiet moments, when the silver moonlight danced on the rippling stream, Elira dared to hope that perhaps, just perhaps, she had found more than sanctuary. She had found a companion, a protector, and something deeper, something she could not yet name, but that whispered of warmth, courage, and a possibility she had almost forgotten. Hope. The forest seemed different now. The silver moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows that twisted and shifted like living creatures. Elira walked beside Kale, her steps careful, her senses alert. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the snap of a branch, the distant call of a night bird made her heart beat faster. Yet she did not look back. The Lycan king moved beside her, steady and commanding, a shadow of power that both reassured and awed her. "We must go deeper," Kale said, his golden eyes fixed on the path ahead. "The relic we seek lies at the heart of the cursed forest. It is our only protection against him, and against the darkness he might unleash." Elira swallowed, feeling the weight of his words. Her ex-lover had grown more dangerous than she had imagined. The thought of him, combined with the unknown power that awaited them in the forest, made her pulse quicken. Yet there was a thrill in the fear, a strange pull that made her step forward despite her trepidation. What is this relic?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Kale's gaze met hers, sharp and unwavering. "It is an ancient artifact, older than this forest, older than the kingdom beyond. It can shield us, protect us from those who would harm you, and bind the dark forces that seek to use your past against you. But reaching it will not be easy." Elira nodded, though doubt tugged at her heart. She had never faced anything like this. She was not a warrior, not a hunter, not a survivor in this supernatural realm. She had only been running, and now she had to fight in ways she could not yet understand. Kale's hand brushed hers briefly as they moved through the dense underbrush. The touch was unexpected, grounding, and filled her with a strange warmth. She stole a glance at him, seeing the determination etched into every line of his face. He carried the weight of centuries, the pain of countless battles, and yet he walked with her as if her life were the most precious thing in the world. The forest grew darker as they approached the heart of the cursed land. Trees twisted into impossible shapes, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching for the sky. Shadows moved unnaturally, shifting and slithering as if the forest itself were alive. Elira's breath caught in her throat. Every instinct screamed for her to run, yet she stood firm beside Kale. "You are ready," he said softly, his voice cutting through the oppressive silence. "Do not doubt yourself. Fear is natural, but it cannot rule you here." Elira nodded again, her hands trembling slightly. She could feel the power of the forest pressing in from all sides, sensing her uncertainty. But Kale's presence was steady, like a rock against the tide of danger. She took a deep breath and stepped forward, trusting him to guide her. They reached a small clearing where the moonlight pooled like liquid silver. At its center stood an ancient stone pedestal, twisted with vines and moss. Upon it rested the relic, a crystal orb glowing with a pale, inner light. It pulsed softly, like a heartbeat, calling to her. Elira stepped closer, drawn by its light, but a sudden movement froze her in place. Shadows erupted from the trees, coalescing into dark shapes that seemed to hunger for their presence. Kale stepped in front of her, his stance protective, muscles tensing. "They will test us," he said, his voice low. "The forest does not give up its treasures willingly." Elira's pulse raced, but she stood her ground. She could feel Kale's power radiating through him, a calm yet fierce force that made the shadows hesitate. He growled low, the sound vibrating through the clearing, and the darkness shivered in response. Together they moved forward. Kale led with strength and precision, while Elira followed, learning to watch and listen as he did. The shadows lunged and twisted, trying to distract her, to prey on her fear. But with Kale guiding her, she began to understand the rhythm of the forest, the way it tested intruders, and the way it could be navigated with patience and courage. Hours seemed to pass in the blink of an eye. Elira found herself growing stronger, more confident. She dodged, ducked, and even reached out to touch the shadows, feeling the cold energy ripple against her fingertips. She realized that fear was not her enemy, it was her teacher. And with Kale beside her, she could learn quickly. Finally, they reached the pedestal. The relic glowed brighter, responding to their approach. Elira hesitated, then reached out. The moment her fingers brushed the crystal, a wave of energy coursed through her body. She stumbled but did not fall. Kale caught her instantly, holding her steady, his eyes locked on hers. "You are ready," he whispered. "We are ready." But before she could respond, a familiar and unwelcome presence made itself known. From the shadows emerged her ex-lover, his eyes gleaming with malice and cunning. He was not alone. Strange, twisted figures moved behind him, creatures of shadow and deceit. "You thought you could hide," he sneered. "You thought I would let you run forever." Elira's heart leapt into her throat, but Kale's hand tightened around hers, grounding her. His presence was a shield against the rising tide of fear. "You underestimated us," Kale said, his voice low, dangerous, "and you will regret it." The ex-lover laughed, a cruel, hollow sound that echoed through the clearing. "I have waited for this moment. You cannot hide behind your wolf forever." Kale stepped forward, and the shadows around him seemed to bend, swirling with his power. His form shifted slightly, larger, more imposing, the golden glow in his eyes intensifying. Elira felt the strength radiating from him, a power she could barely comprehend. "You will not touch her," Kale said, his voice a low growl that carried through the trees. "Not while I live." The ex-lover's grin faltered, but he did not retreat. Instead, he raised his hand, and the creatures behind him surged forward, dark forms that moved like smoke, twisting toward Elira and Kale. "Elira," Kale said, his tone urgent. "Stay close, trust yourself." "Trust me?" She nodded, feeling a surge of determination. The fear was still there, but it was no longer paralyzing. She had learned to stand, to face the darkness, and to fight, not with weapons but with courage and presence. The creatures lunged, and Kale moved like lightning, swift and precise, protecting Elira with every motion. She followed his lead, dodging and stepping, learning the rhythm of the fight, her heart racing but her mind sharp. For the first time, she felt a sense of power, small, fragile, but undeniable. Hours seemed to pass in a blur of motion and shadows. Finally, the last of the creatures dissipated into smoke, leaving the clearing quiet once more. Elira's chest heaved, sweat dampening her hair, but she stood tall beside Kale, her trust in him deepened by what they had survived. The ex-lover lay on the ground, defeated for now, his plan thwarted. But the warning in his eyes remained clear. He was not finished. Elira knew the threat would return, stronger and more cunning than before. Kale reached for the relic, lifting it from the pedestal. Its glow illuminated the clearing, washing over them in a soft, protective light. Elira felt the warmth of its power, a shield that would guard them against future dangers. "You did well," Kale said, his voice softer now, almost tender. "You faced fear and did not falter. That is rare and precious." Elira looked at him, the exhaustion and adrenaline making her feel fragile and strong at the same time. "I couldn't have done it without you," she admitted, her voice quiet. Kale's eyes softened, and he lowered himself to her level, his golden gaze locking with hers. "You could," he said, "and you will. I only guide you. You carry more strength than you know." For a moment the forest was still. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying away the last remnants of darkness. Elira felt a sense of peace she had not known in a long time, a connection to Kale, to the forest, and to a part of herself that had been hidden under fear and running. But even in that moment of calm, she knew the danger was not gone. Her ex-lover's shadow lingered at the edges of her mind, a reminder that the world outside this forest remained treacherous. Kale sensed her thoughts. "We will be ready," he said. "Together, we are stronger than anything that comes for us. trust in that. Elira nodded, feeling a bond between them that went beyond words. She had entered this forest as a hunted girl, frightened and alone. Now she stood beside a Lycan king, learning to face danger with courage, trust, and a growing sense of hope. The moon rose higher, casting silver light over the forest. Elira and Kale walked together, side by side, toward the deeper shadows of the woods. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and mystery, but they would face it together. And though the ex-lover's threat remained, for the first time, Elira felt that she was not merely surviving. She was learning to fight, to trust, and to live in a world that had once seemed full of only fear. The night stretched on, and the forest whispered secrets that only they could hear. In the heart of danger, amidst shadows and trials, a bond had been forged, a bond that would shape the nights and days to come. And for Elira, that bond was everything. The moon hung high over the forest, casting silver light on the jagged cliffs and twisted trees. Elira stood beside Kale, the Lycan king, atop a rocky outcrop overlooking the kingdom beyond. The air was thick with tension, as if the world itself held its breath. Tonight, the final confrontation awaited them. Her ex-lover had gathered allies, both human and dark creatures that obeyed his command. His malice was no longer hidden behind a charming mask. It had grown into a storm of hatred and desire for control. Elira had faced fear before, but nothing like this. She felt her pulse quicken, and yet, as Kale's hand brushed hers, a calm strength settled over her. "We face him now," Kale said, his golden eyes reflecting the moonlight. "You have learned courage, you have learned strength. Trust that, trust us." Elira nodded. She had grown so much since fleeing through the haunted forest. The girl who had run blindly was gone. In her place stood someone ready to fight, not just for survival, but for the right to live freely, to choose her own path. The ex-lover emerged from the shadows, his eyes gleaming with cruelty. Behind him, twisted creatures of darkness moved like smoke, surrounding them. "So we meet at last," he sneered. "Do you think you can hide behind your wolf forever?" Kale growled low, his fur bristling. Elira felt the vibration in her chest, a warning and a promise all at once. "I do not hide," Kale said, his voice low and steady, "and she does not run. Tonight it ends." Elira drew a deep breath. The relic they had retrieved from the forest glowed faintly in her hands, a soft light that offered protection. She could feel its warmth and energy, a reminder of the trials they had faced together, the courage she had discovered within herself. The ex-lover charged, his dark creatures surging forward. Kale leapt, moving with a speed and power that defied human limits. His golden eyes shone like twin suns in the night. Elira followed, her fear replaced by determination. She dodged the shadowy forms, letting the rhythm Kale had taught her guide her movements. Every motion was precise, deliberate, a dance of survival and courage. The ex-lover struck at Kale, but Kale was faster. Elira watched, heart racing, as the two clashed. The Lycan King's strength was immense, but his restraint was equally impressive. He did not seek to destroy, only to protect. Every blow he parried, every movement he made was aimed at keeping Elira safe. "You are stronger than you know," Kale said, glancing briefly at her. His voice was a tether keeping her grounded amidst the chaos. "Do not let fear guide your hand. Let courage." Elira nodded, and for the first time she acted not out of fear but with purpose. She touched the relic, and a wave of light spread from it, pushing back the shadow creatures. They hissed and recoiled, the darkness weakening under the power she wielded. Her ex-lover faltered, his expression twisting in surprise and fury. Kale used the opening to strike decisively, moving with precision and control. The ex-lover was strong, but he was reckless, driven by obsession and anger. Elira watched as Kale's eyes, filled with controlled fury, met her gaze. There was no fear there, only trust, and the unspoken promise that she was safe. The battle raged across the cliffside, the clash of power echoing through the forest. Elira felt the rush of adrenaline, the thrill of action, and the strange, growing connection to Kale that went beyond fear or gratitude. She was learning what it meant to stand beside someone, to trust not just in their strength, but in their presence. Finally, Kale cornered the ex-lover. Elira, clutching the relic, stepped forward. "It ends now," she said, her voice steady, echoing over the cliff. "We are not afraid of you anymore." The ex-lover's eyes widened, and for the first time, Elira saw doubt flicker in his expression. Kale's golden eyes glowed brighter, and a deep, rumbling growl shook the earth. The relic in Elira's hands pulsed with light, a shield of power that even the darkness could not pierce. "You have underestimated her," Kale said, his voice calm but firm. "And you have underestimated me." The ex-lover made one last desperate move, lashing out with dark energy, but Elira and Kale acted as one. She released the power of the relic, a brilliant wave of silver light, and Kale struck with precision. The ex-lover's forces scattered and he fell, defeated, not destroyed but stripped of the power to harm them. Silence followed. The wind swept through the trees, carrying away the remnants of shadow. Elira's chest heaved with exhaustion, but a smile touched her lips. They had survived. They had fought together and they had prevailed. Kale stepped closer, his form towering but not intimidating now, his golden eyes softening. "You were brave," he said. "You faced what you feared most and you did not falter." Elira shook her head, laughing softly. "I could not have done it without you." Kale's gaze held hers, and for a moment the world seemed to pause. The forest, the moon, the cliffs, all were silent witnesses to the bond forged in fear, courage, and trust. "No," he said softly. "You could, I only guided you. You are stronger than even you realize, and now we are free to choose together." Elira's heart swelled. The journey had changed her, taught her to trust, to fight, to feel courage she had never known. And Kale, who had carried centuries of loneliness and pain, had found someone who believed in him, who had seen beyond the fearsome exterior to the being he truly was. They stood together on the cliff, the moonlight reflecting off the relic in Elira's hands, casting silver light across their faces. The forest around them was alive but calm, as if acknowledging their victory, their bond, and the transformation that had taken place. Kale lowered his head, his golden eyes locking with hers. "You are safe now, little one," he whispered. Elira's lips curved into a smile. This time the words were not only protection, they were promise, hope, and a shared choice to face whatever the future held, side by side. The wind stirred, carrying the faint scent of the forest and the distant kingdom beyond. Elira felt it in her bones, the power of courage, trust, and love, woven together in a bond that could not be broken by darkness, fear, or the past. "You will not be alone," Kale continued, his voice gentle but certain. "Not while I stand with you." Elira reached up, brushing her hand across his fur-covered cheek, and in that simple gesture, the weight of fear lifted from her heart. The hunted girl had vanished, replaced by someone who could face the world with strength, hope, and trust. And the Lycan king, long isolated and scarred, had found someone who could see beyond his curse to the man, and the soul he truly was. "Together," she whispered. "Together," Kale echoed, his voice carrying over the cliffs and the forest below. They walked back toward the heart of the forest, side by side. The relic's light bathed their path, and though the night remained long and filled with unseen shadows, neither of them feared what might come. They had faced darkness, danger, and fear, and they had emerged stronger, united, and ready to embrace the days ahead. For Elira, the forest no longer felt like a prison or a place of fear. It was a home, a place of growth, of courage, and of bonds that could withstand even the deepest darkness. For Kale, the Lycan king, the world seemed wider, lighter, filled with the possibility of companionship, trust, and perhaps, in time, love that could heal centuries of solitude. The moon continued its slow journey across the sky, casting silver light over the trees and cliffs. And as Elira and Kale moved forward, their steps in rhythm, their hearts aligned, the forest whispered its approval. Shadows retreated, night creatures settled, and the world seemed to breathe with a sense of hope renewed. In the quiet aftermath of the battle, Elira realized something profound. The world outside would always hold danger, fear, and shadows. But with Kale, with courage, and with trust, she could face anything. And perhaps more importantly, she could finally allow herself to live fully, without fear of being hunted or controlled. Kale paused, turning to face her once more. His golden eyes softened in the moonlight, filled with something deep, unspoken, and yet clear in its meaning. "You are safe," he said again, his voice carrying the same promise, the same warmth. "And now you are free." Elira smiled, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. "Yes," she said softly, "free and not alone." The wind stirred again, carrying with it the scent of moss, earth, and silvered moonlight. The forest was alive and yet peaceful. For the first time, Elira allowed herself to imagine a future beyond fear, a future where courage, trust, and the bond she shared with Kale could guide her path. They stood together, two souls shaped by trials, shadows, and moonlight. The night stretched around them, dark yet gentle, filled with possibility. And for the first time in a long time, both of them knew. They had survived, they had grown, and they had found something more powerful than fear, more lasting than danger, and more profound than the darkness that had once pursued them. Together they stepped forward into the silver light, into a world that was uncertain, wild, and full of possibility. Together they faced the future, not as hunted and protector, but as companions, allies, and perhaps, one day, something even deeper. And the forest whispered around them, a soft, approving murmur, as the Lycan king and the girl who had once fled through the shadows began a new chapter of their lives, bound by trust, courage, and the unspoken promise of a bond that could withstand any darkness.